Hey there. So about a week ago I wanted to do a recap vlog and I ended up doing a bit of a double more rant broken up into two videos. I didn't cover everything I wanted to talk about, just like a random overview of some recent things. I've got a sheet of topics here and I'm just going to ramble about each of them as I was going to say as briefly as I can, but I'm always so long-winded about this shit. So I talked about America allowing unvaccinated into the country and Dr. Randomacam. I talked about ANCAPs you should subscribe to, Tick History, Lark and Rose, Danny Duchamp, Count Dankula. I think I mentioned the depressing abyss of job hunting, bank stuff and car stuff. I'm trying to recap on car stuff right now because I ransacked my room looking for notes and provisional driving licence and highway code, and I must have accidentally thrown it out. So I have to recap all that stuff somehow, maybe get some refresher lessons, which is going to be expensive, but the entire deal of getting a car is going to be expensive. But yeah, that's one of the ways that expands opportunities for work. I probably talked about plans for trips and how some trips might be I'm in two minds about trips, and like some of them seem like they could be a waste of cash these days. And I probably talked about how Alfie was. He kind of went missing for a few hours last night, and I worried a lot about him, but he's back again. There's the usual traffic zooming behind the road. I'm going to try and break up this. I might end up breaking up this vlog because I've got to look really carefully at the battery on this camera, because it runs down, it lies about how much battery there is. It currently says 4 hours 02, ends up being like 30 minutes on that battery, whereas the smaller battery lasts longer. So this cam is balked, this secondary camera I have. Just went for a walk at Grenfell yesterday, you'll probably see that video soon. You might see that video before this one, in which case you've watched it, great, thank you. YouTubers who I'm watching at the moment, or video makers should I say. Haze Outdoors, Biggest Problem podcast with Dick Masterson. I was watching The Dick Show last night, which is Dick Masterson's main podcast, but I think there might be a splinter point soon where I start moving away from Dick Masterson, because he's not focusing as much on his anti-government stuff, anti-lockdown stuff, and he is doing the centrist things of pushing against conservatives, but he's not pushing quite as much against the left. I prefer him to push against both of them, but he's involved with lots of unsavoury figures like Nick Fuentes and some people like that, and then he got a guy on his show yesterday called Zerka, who is just an absolute maniac. And yeah, I generally like him. I like his charisma. I like how he's like a radio host. I like how he was up in arms against lockdown stuff when so many people in the freedom world just weren't, when they should have been. He did a debate against Mr. Metokur, Jim, and he was arguing freedom issues, whereas the other dude was arguing safety and worrying about catching the rebranded flu. And I watch a lot of Honey Badger Radio still, because Dr. Randomacam's great, and he's on there a lot. The host, the Doge guy, I've forgotten his name, Brian, is cool, and sometimes they get Karen Strawn on, who's awesome, and the other girls who are on there are pretty cool. They may go off topic or into conservative talking points now and then, but most of the time they're focused on MRA stuff, which is quite interesting because no one else is talking about it. There's some stuff on here which is just very difficult for me to express very well. Got a note here that says, family issues, temporary peace, when the dust settles, what is left behind. Things have been slightly better on the family situation. I talked about that on my moron rant vlog, so I don't need to go into it too much, but it's like after about a year or more than a year actually, but a year since I was assaulted and a year since the worst of it. But I look back in my sketchbooks and diary things, and this stuff with my brother apparently was going on quite a long time. I think it was going on in the 2010s to some extent, so he must have changed around then, but it got really bad in the last year or two. Yeah, up to recently. It's still kind of happening on a low level, but a lot of it has, like, the dust has settled, as I wrote here in my note. But when you have something that bad just happen focused for a year, it just changes the situation you're in to the point where you can't really go back. Like, there's no rational communication that can happen between me and him, and he's forced me into a bad position where most of my stuff is just behind lock and key, and I've got to deal with it in a cramped space, and I've got to just keep dealing with that until I can move out. And I don't want to have to do that. I don't want to have to live out of bags and boxes and overprotect my stuff as I move around the place, because I know what he wants to do to it, and he's proven on multiple occasions that he wants to fuck with all my stuff, and he wants to fuck with me as well, and my body, by which I mean he wants to assault me. And you can't really get back from that, so you're just kind of what's left behind when it all finally calms down and gets closer to something resembling a peace or a truce, or just a civility or something, if you can call it that. What's left behind is just this degraded version of our environment that we're in. Anyway, enough about that. Again, lots of things that are quite hard to go into. You probably need a video to explain exactly the whole concept of what I mean, but there's one note here. Job hunting, house hunting, and love hunting, like finding a partner, are all very alike. You notice this when you're doing all three at once. You notice just they're so similar. Like, the process of each one is similar. The inability to get things is similar. The expectation from the other party that you have to be something in order to even get considered or have the first steps happen. The search, the comparisons of the different, versions of things that you're trying to get into, pros and cons. You're kind of shopping around, like even in a love situation, you're kind of shopping around, you're looking, you're comparing, you're trying to find the person who fits you, and the same is true of like a job. You're trying to find a job that fits you, you're comparing things, you're asking, they're judging you, and the same thing happens with house hunting as well, except I think you get a little tiny speck further in house hunting or flat hunting than in the other two. So they're not identical, but they're all very alike. And yeah, it probably needs to be its own topic that you break down for it to be its own video or something. There's a note here. It's a problem when you write a note about what you want to vlog about. You're often in a different mood from when you're actually doing the vlog. You're actually at the point where you're available to talk about it. Like, the mood has changed. So I've got here, love and flirting in the present day and what it consists of. I'm not in the right mood, I think, to talk about that right now. I'm more in a practical mood now, and back then I was in more of a thoughtful mood, if you know what I mean. So I was probably going deeper into that in my mind at the time and had some points, but I'm kind of forgetful, and I've forgotten what those points are right now, and I'm not in the mood to be able to just naturally pick them up again. Love and flirting in the present day and what it consists of. I was probably talking about how social media has fucked up love, and how back in my day in the 90s it was different, and it wasn't like controlled. You didn't have the government control, you didn't have the far left control, you didn't have formalising. They were trying to begin to shape kind of behaviour rules and things back then. And then again, before I was born in the 1950s, it was probably different again. I think both those eras before now, everyone had more choice, and you didn't have to deal with the minefield of, well, the person you want to ask out might be a lesbian, they might be there might be a man in this case, in the current day. You might be like, oh, this is just someone who's become a woman, or tried to become a woman, but physically their biology is that they're a man, and you've like mistaken them for something they're not. And there's other things as well, like the politics that leads kids to be indoctrinated into that mindset. Like the politics is pervaded by things by TV, and so a lot of normies have got too many of those aspects in them. And so you're just walking down the street and you see an attractive person, it literally means nothing, because you could start talking to them and they could be a far leftist, or they could be a statist, or they could have gone along with lockdown rules back in the day, or they could be a conservative, but like an extreme form of conservative, because there's a lot of them around now. Tradcons, Catholic paleocons, and like essentially the resurgence of the far right. It does exist in a form in deep conservatism. Mild conservatism, not so bad, but you're still a statist, so you're still allowed taxes and lockdowns. You know, over time I've become geared against you. I think like they're living a kind of lie in a way, because a lot of them are pro-gun, but they're not pro-freedom, because they vote in candidates like Trump or DeSantis who they will tax you, and they will put controls up against you, and they will use the police on you, and all sorts of things. Again, trying to find someone who's like you, these days I would go for politics first over like looks and things. Sometimes I go for personality first, or demeanour when talking to me, because they might be open to understanding a freedom viewpoint. If you're able to talk to them easily, then you're able to talk to them about what you know about easily. So, but sometimes that's such a block, because most of the other people they know are normies who watch TV and get indoctrinated into far left viewpoints and things. So yeah, I think it would be easier for me to meet someone at a libertarian conference or something, and then work out if they're an anarchist or something, because you can't really, it's not really easy to make like an ANCAP or anarchist conference, if you know what I mean, because of feds and things like this. Obviously ANCAPs are openly against government, so government's openly probably like looking into these people who are like me, and trying to figure out if they've got any plans, or what they're doing, or what it is that they're up to, because they know that they're hated by people like me because of what they do. Ruby Ridge, Waco, lockdowns, all of it. So yeah, I don't even know if that's what I was thinking of when I wrote the note. It could have been something more innocent than that. Love and flirting in the present day, what it consists of. Yeah, because there's lots of different routes about what you can talk about. I noticed, like, nobody really talks about love in the 20th century sense, how it used to be before all the feminist bullshit came in and just destroyed the concept of, like, coupling between men and women. So not enough people are talking about that now. So I feel like, because no one's talking about it, I want to talk about it, because it's not out there. I'm not finding enough videos about it. Like, when I think that about a subject, I'm like, well, if it's not there, then I'll make it, because it needs to be there. So yeah, that's part of my elevatism movement, was kind of love advocacy for the old style of love that we used to remember, like between men and women in the 20th century. About my more walking, let's have a look at this battery actually. Yeah, it seems okay at the moment. We finished the Western Line. I'm going to turn that into a documentary series over time. I've slowed down on that recently because of life shit. I will put a few more zones in. I still need to complete the Dewston area before I can finish that documentary series. I'm not going to do a documentary series on the Central Line, but I will visit Central Line tours. I'm not going to do a documentary series on the Eastern Line, but I will visit Eastern Line tours when I can get over there, and a car might help with that. If you want to know more about Eastern Line tours anyway, read Max's book. So I'm covering the West and he's covering the East, basically. Watching a few TV shows recently. I rewatched Basic, which is a good film. I love John Travolta and his crazy roles, but it's more shallower than I remember. Watching a lot of Family Guy, but I'm noticing a lot more far left politics in it. I prefer the episodes. They do episodes that are just like humour and non-political, but Seth MacFarlane, he just keeps dropping in like leftist politics, and when you're younger and you're watching that show, you don't notice it. But when you get into the point where you kind of understand a bit of what he was doing, you're like, fucking it, fuck off, get this out of your show, you know? I just want to enjoy like an amusing cartoon show with excellent timing and good jokes, which is what Family Guy mostly is. Good atmosphere and good animation. I started watching a show called John Adams, but it's like founding of America stuff, and it's very statist, and you think that the whole show is building up to the American Revolution, the American War of Independence, should I say, but it like kind of glosses over that. It goes through like 3 episodes and it glosses over the end of the American War of Independence, and then it's just like about him talking to some of the famous founding fathers, and I guess Paul Giamatti's acting and how he's slowly making his way to president. And there's loads of scenes where it's just like, I didn't like it because it was just people like 2 people having a conversation, or 3 people, and it's smattered full of just close-ups of their face, like staring at each other and giving endless reaction shots forever in silence, like between things they've said. And it's getting into Lord of the Rings territory, where it's just like conversations are taking 1 billion years. At least it's not got like haunting music like between the endless pauses in dialogue. But it's still, I stopped at episode 3 or 4 because it's just like the American War of Independence was over. Where can it go from here? And it wasn't really going anywhere interesting. I heard about the new James Bond film, that they kill off James Bond. I mean, that shit took over by leftists. I'm not going to watch any of it. It's like the Indiana Jones recent film. The communists just took a franchise and ruined it. They did it with Star Wars as well. They're doing it with everything. The last James Bond film was The World Is Not Enough, which in initials is Twine, which I think is kind of fun. Because Die Another Day was absolute shit, and that's when the Bond film started to go wrong. Casino Royale was alright, but it was already incorrect because the timeline is completely backwards. M is playing a different M that is the Judi Dench M that is before the male M's, but is older than the Judi Dench M and is the Judi Dench M as she would be after she appeared in the Pierce Brosnan films. It doesn't make any sense. Felix is black. Don't mind that so much, but he's grown back his leg after a shark attack. They're using social media, but Casino Royale takes place in the Cold War before Dr. No. I didn't mind that James Bond is blonde. I didn't mind that it was Daniel Craig so much. Daniel Craig isn't a very Bondy James Bond, but that Casino Royale, when you just stop to think about it, even though it's a bit of an enjoyable film to watch, it's just all over the fucking place. It doesn't make any fucking sense. It's like a alternate universe reboot film. It doesn't make any sense. So, The World Is Not Enough is the last Bond film. That's my rant about the far left takeover of Bond. I've got other rants, being an ANCAP, about rewatching Bond in general. Because I've always liked the Bond films, and I do kind of like the Bond films. But getting into what Bond is, it'd be interesting to watch it from my new political perspective, because Bond is a state officer, an agent of government. So, let's say the lockdowns would happen in the James Bond universe. He'd be on the side of government, he'd be on the side of enforcing lockdowns, he'd be wearing a mask, he'd be taking the vax, he'd probably get some sort of mission, or he'd have some related behaviours in which he'd be suppressing the public for the crown or for the government. And yeah, so it'd be interesting to rewatch the Bond films, and I think I would just start noticing all the bullshit statist stuff that Bond does in his position as a state officer. Like halfway between a policeman and a member of the military for the British. Like Klaus Schwab would, despite Klaus Schwab looking like a Bond film, James Bond would be a dream to Klaus Schwab. He'd probably be working for Klaus Schwab. Bond is meant to be set in the Cold War. That's something big about it. Looking back from a modern perspective, he'd probably be a bad guy. Looking at him from a feminist perspective, I'm sure he's a bad guy. But the feminists took over the franchise and they feminized him to be what they wanted. So, and he's a lot closer to what they want in the first place because he's a statist. In the past, I might have been fooled into thinking James Bond was like right wing or something, like a conservative. There are some quips here and there in the Deep South Bond films with Roger Moore that indicate that he has progressive leftist tendencies, but either way it doesn't really matter because he'd be an authoritarian statist. So yeah, it's a character that's hard to enjoy as time goes on. It's still enjoyable, but it's harder to enjoy. If you broke his, you could fix Bond though for anarchists. You could break his connections to government. Actually, License to Kill, Bond goes rogue, doesn't he? He breaks away from British government and he goes rogue. And that's one of my favourite Bond films, if not my favourite. So it's a toss-up between that one and From Russia with Love. For Your Eyes Only is pretty good as well. But yeah, he goes rogue in that one, so you could say that that's the most anarchist Bond film. GoldenEye's actually where some of the feminism got its teeth in the earlier series, and then it seemed to go away again for a bit. I don't want to watch The Sound of Freedom. I don't know what happened to, what's the guy's name? Played Jesus. He's in The Sound of Freedom thing. He's doing the press stuff for it. Anyway, I loved him in The Count of Monte Cristo. In that, he's excellent. I'll put on screen his name if I can think of it, while I'm in the editing room. Christian someone? No, that's not right. Anyway, he's been doing this trafficking thing. He's crazy and absolutely fucking batshit crazy in all the behind the scenes interviews for it. It just sounds like a right whack job. The whole trafficking issue sounds like a load of bullshit to me anyway. It sounds like a mixture of conservative and leftist propaganda to get rid of porn, which essentially allows them to control free speech and make anti-government speech illegal, a la Venezuela right now. So yeah, I'm just not interested in the trafficking issue. It does seem like tactic of the authoritarians to remove speech, or control speech, should I say. I wanted to do political vlogs again. I've got lots of political topics here. I can do a really brief summarising of each point I've got on this piece of paper for this video, but each of these things, honestly, that I've been talking about kind of deserves their own entire video, because there's so much to get into on every topic I could talk about, just so much. That's why I started doing topic vlogs, I think, because when you break things down into just like a small phrase or even a word like convenience, you can just spend hours talking about that one focused issue, and even then you might tangent hop. So, points I've got here: tradcons and their failure to the anti-SJWs and libertarians. Maybe that means that could mean moderate conservatives in general, because it feeds really easily into tradconism. Yeah, that's something where you could do an entire video on that. How the anti-SJWs like me splintered up. The original anti-feminists under Sargon and Karen Strawn and like Baring and Shoe on Head and Chris Reagan and Undoomed and all that. There's what we were meant to be. What we were pushing for is basically libertarianism, a kind of centrism, which naturally fed into ANCAPism for me after the lockdowns. And it's just like, there's so much you could say about how the Conservatives tried to hijack the anti-SJW movement. Sargon did a lot of groundwork in a kind of centrist way, and then it kind of fed into opportunists within Christian conservative movements who took what we were doing and used like a shallower, perverted version of it to push their own agenda. And now they've kind of co-opted the movement, or co-opted what the movement had built. Like, they built this idea structure, and conservatives took it without knowing what it was for and started using it. And yeah, there's a lot to talk about in that subject. There's another one, fake libertarians. There's a lot to talk about in that subject. a lot of people who are calling themselves libertarians are actually leftists. There are some people who are calling themselves libertarians who are actual libertarians, but it's hard to explain to people what that is so they get it instantaneously when they see it. The same with fake anarchists is the next point on the list. You've got people on the left trying to co-opt anarchism. They're coming up with this thing called ANCOM, which can't exist. It physically can't exist. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever, because socialists are in requirement of a state in order to do what they do, and anarchy means not having a state at all. So it doesn't make any sense. It's like having hot ice or something like that. I would say non-alcoholic wine, but apparently you can get non-alcoholic wine, as much of a contradiction as that sounds. I could say dark light, but people go like, oh, there's probably such a thing as dark light, and they'll weasel their way around your attempt to present two opposites at them. And I guess I've mentioned a little bit about my elevatism idea and the love portion of that, so yeah, that deserves more focus on its own video. The next point is like, where now for ANCAPs? Hibernation or growing? Again, that probably needs its own video, but you can kind of see where I was trying to go with that thought. Being an ANCAP, the end goal that requires political activists of an ANCAP persuasion to exist. Like, if you have a problem, then you'll have like a political activist for that problem, and that's why conservatism exists. That's why leftism exists, although their problem can never be achieved. That's probably why it's around so much. You can never achieve communism, pure equality. It's just not possible to achieve that. So there'll always be leftist activists, and there'll always be ANCAPs like me until the ANCAP thing is achieved, which some call a utopia, but I don't think it's a utopia. I like to think of it as a moonshot. I think you need to get in a right mindset, you need to get a lot of people to get in that mindset with you, and you need a lot of bravery that we only just saw the tip of during lockdowns, like the non-compliant, unvaccinated, the truckers against Trudeau, the tractors against the Dutch. You only saw tiny flecks of bravery, the sort of bravery that's needed in order for like the ANCAP cause to be won. And so I guess we're in kind of hibernation, and we're trying to build up our ideas, present them in the popular view, present them to the normies, try and win them over so that they don't get red-pilled or blue-pilled to left and right. They take a centrist view and they go to libertarianism or something. But that's going to take a long time, so we're going to be around for a long time saying what we say until we get some more wins, I guess. People on YouTube who I watch on the right and their failures or failings. So I could talk about Razorfist, I could talk about Critical Drinker, I could talk about Sydney Watson. I still watch Critical Drinker. I've recently kind of stopped watching Razorfist. I might go back to him, but I really enjoyed his stuff for the longest time. Just the stuff he's saying about anarchists and about libertarians, and especially about property as pertains to like digital IPs, and how that's not the same as physical property, but he thinks it is, and he's willing to go to kind of quite aggressive lengths to defend that, and I can't really be a part of that. And it's a shame. He's doing good artistic work, but some parts of his politics in some directions are very extreme, and then because he's popular, he's getting more people onto those causes, which is a bad idea. But he's very charismatic, and he's kind of dangerous in a way, in that if he thinks something, tons more people will agree with it than many other people on the internet. Because he's cool, and he's got a persona, and he loves lots of pop culture, and he makes good art and does good stories, and he knows about storytelling and stuff. Yeah, he's a cool personality, but if his politics go down the pan, then people follow him because of his cool art and personality, and get into these terrible aspects of his politics here and there. A lot of his politics are good, but it's weighed down by some pretty extreme things that he thinks on the side. Sydney Watson's fallen prey to all the conservative people who watch her, who, because of Sargon, when Sargon started following Academic Agent, or maybe it was before that, he came up with the idea that because the leftists were calling everybody Nazis, that he had some ground, because he'd seen a few things here and there, that he could just do the same thing that they were doing with the word Nazi, with the word pedo, and that they would call everyone a pedo without evidence, in the same way that the left called everyone a Nazi without evidence. So now you've got an extreme right that is acting exactly like the extreme left, because of people like Sargon. And I think Don the Pleb even confessed to this, that he follows that idea, and which is why I've been watching a lot less Don the Pleb. Not that he's around much to watch, which is probably a good thing if he starts believing this shit. And Sydney Watson's one of those. Like, she's got too many conservative followers pushing this idea, and the child trafficking or the adult trafficking thing with the porn industry, and the whole kind of call everyone a pedo without evidence, which is like Vito Gesualdi on The Biggest Problem has fallen prey to the conservatives who are doing this as well. He's not a paedophile. He'll never be a paedophile. And yeah, this is just what they do. This is the craze from the 1990s, 1991 I think. You might have seen Brass Eye, where they did that episode called Pedogeddon. Well, there was lots of things happening in the 90s where there was this obsession with paedophilia to the point where just everyone was starting being called a paedophile. Then it went away for a little bit, and since resurged with the right, and I think it's due to people like Sargon, to be honest, who pushed this idea just as a way to use the left's Nazi tactic against them. But it hasn't worked, because you're just doing exactly the same thing as the evil that you're trying to stop by broadening terms to the point where they don't mean anything, and they're just like the worst word you can think of. Let's just use it on anyone we don't like or disagree with, regardless of whether they are or not. So, yeah. The right's gone fucking insane. And this is one of the reasons I watch, like, Dick Masterson, is he's picked up on this and he's completely against it. And obviously Vito is, because he's been smeared with this horrible word when he isn't anything like what he's being named. He's not even slightly this thing that he's being branded. So yeah, it's all gone way too far. The right is just a shit show, a laughing stock. And a lot of right-wing channels I just can't really... I've stopped watching. Or right-leaning channels even, because they're all falling for it. Yeah. Politics shit. It's insane. Another point on this list is technological video brackets more limitations. Bad mic, cam not set back, don't bring tripod, no drone, no bushcraft stuff, rich people, broken webcam. So that's a bit of that's kind of all over the place. What was that about? That's about me not wanting to waste money and not having the money to be able to just use it frivolously to repair technology I have that's going wrong. Like, I film on these cameras. If this camera broke, it'd be fine because I got my new camera. If both of them broke, I'd have to buy a new camera. The mics on these cameras are already terrible, but since there's no way to get a foolproof, definite, good microphone, I wouldn't want to just spend money trying out 10 types of microphone until I found one that works. So I'm not buying a microphone to fix my microphone problem. It's just every now and then my videos will have bad audio, and we just kind of got to live with that until some point in the future I have money that I can just use for entertainment stuff or something, leisure stuff, rather than food and saving my life and earning a living. So at the moment, a bunch of things are breaking and I'm not fixing them. Every now and then, like I got that tarp to fix the problem of having the tarp that was too big. I just thought that didn't cost me too much money, so I could go ahead with it. And as a result, I finally got the tarp that works, and I can probably use that at some point to do a better camp. Yeah, but you see people who also do hiking channels like me, and they do a lot of drone shots because they've just got a basic drone. I've never seriously considered buying a drone or a GoPro because at the moment it feels like if I bought one it'd be using up too much money at the moment, and I want to spend my money on things that are important, on a higher priority. So yeah, if you think any of my videos are bad quality, I'm sorry. This is still an okay level of quality for my videos. I'm kind of happy with it for the most part, but it could do with improvements, and the improvements aren't going to come unless my life situation improves. So that's how it is. I'm not a rich person. I've got a point here about lacking my old friends. A lot of my old friends, I wish they never left. There's some people from my past who I really like, and they're not here now, and I always hate that they went away. I don't know why they went away. I don't have any good explanations for why, they just kind of did. And yeah, I miss them terribly. And I guess that's again a whole video right there in that one point. I could talk about four more points on this list for stuff to talk about. Here's a point that says I'd like to go into my thoughts of death, which sounds kind of morbid. Thoughts of mortality. I did mention on my vlog on the moor about the dead animals Instagram, so that was going to be part of it. So I did talk about that briefly. Again, it just sounds morbid to say, but I've got to go into detail about it. It's something I can't say very easily, but it's like sometimes I feel like I died in 2021 in my mind somewhat because of lockdowns, and it had just been getting that way over and over again, you know. It's about blackpilling and it's about depression, and it really does that one could be like so many videos long. It could be like 3 videos long at the moment, so that's how dense the subject is. There's too much for me to talk about, and it's just one sentence here. I'd like to talk a bit about my exes. It's difficult, you know, talking about old friends and exes and old people you used to date is difficult for a lot of reasons, but you know, it's part of my own personal history. Like, I went through something, I have these thoughts, I experienced something in my life, and I have a right to talk about what happened to me in my experiences and my history. And so I'd like to talk about what went on, even if it involves using like some sort of pseudonym or something to, like, I wouldn't use a full name of my ex or something. I'd probably use a first name, or I'd come up with a pseudonym for them, like, this is not her real name. Now let's talk about what the fuck they did. Again, your own history, you have a right to talk about that, and not enough people talk about love, and it's because of how people act in relationships or even after relationships to each other that makes this stuff hard to talk about, when it should be a free speech thing and everyone should be free to talk about it without anyone wanting to attack you for it, I guess. And so I'm kind of I hate using the word activist, so I'm not gonna. I'm an advocate for those issues. Let's say that. I advocate for it, and I advocate for the people who want to talk out about it but can't. And I call that kind of love advocacy, I guess. You know, being able to talk about stuff that is pretty censored these days, made taboo, and it doesn't need to be made taboo. And the process of making it taboo is actually a tactic to change the way people live from how they did in the past, and I'm not cool with that. There's a point here that signs that I'm getting older. You can notice in my old videos, my hair's more the colour it naturally was, like mousy brown. Obviously I've had this bald spot since like 2012 due to a hair dye brand that fucked me up that I'm always pissed about. But my hair's like started actually going grey now. It's like the past 2 years, maybe. I don't know if I believe the thing that people say about stress making your hair go grey or making your hair fall out or whatever they say happens. I don't believe that thing happens myself. But obviously when you get older, your hair turns grey, and the sign that I'm getting older is my hair is less mousy brown and more grey hairs appearing. Yeah, the bald spot thing was like a pseudo oldness. It made me feel old, but I wasn't old when I had it. It was, again, due to this bullshit hair dye thing I used. Started losing hair, and just like, when I noticed it happening, I was just like, oh my god, I can never be cute again, was the thought that was going through my mind. I mean, in some ways I can be, personality wise, but I always used cuteness as I was as a weird sort of kid. I never believed in the kind of masculinity, femininity bullshit that the conservatives believe, that you have to be this macho tough guy whoever you are or whatever. I always used kind of cuteness as a currency. I always thought I could be cute with girls, and if I used that part of myself, that sort of attractiveness that I had at a certain stage of my teenage or young adult life, that was how I could get on with people and how I could talk to girls more and how I could talk to friends more if I kind of played that role, I suppose, as a kind of smaller kind of person, because I knew I wasn't a big person. I always knew I wasn't a tough person. I knew I got bullied in high school an awful lot, and so when you go through that stuff, you don't have thoughts of being Mr. Tough Guy or bodybuilder or whatever, or the sporty person. You don't have those kind of thoughts going through your head. You construct a version of yourself based on what you do and based on what you live like. And I was like the arty kid, I was the nerdy kid, I liked computer games, I went to the chess club, I played a little bit of football with the more laddish kids for a stretch, you know. I came out of the nerdy places and played sport for a while with the some of the, I won't call them the bad kids, but the more laddish kids when I was in high school. But most of the time I knew what I was and I used what I was. The bigger battery just fucking, I think it lost my huge recording that I was doing. It gave no signal that the battery was going down, no signal that the battery was going out. The camera just turned off mid-rec recording, and I think I've just lost my big file. I was talking for ages here. Let me have a look. I think I have. It fucking did, dude. Sony AX33 fucking lost some footage. Huge amount of footage. I was here for like an hour or two. I bet it's like on this memory card somehow, kind of as a corrupted file that you need some special program to recover that I don't have. Oh my god. Can I recover these fucking files somehow? Ah. I hate that thing that happens when you're recording on one of these cameras and the battery runs out during recording. The recording doesn't shut off before the battery runs out and the file is completely lost, corrupted on the memory card. There is a file that you can't access with any video player if you plugged it into your PC, and it's just because of this thing that happens. You need to design a camera that knows the battery's going to run out, stops recording, and then the battery runs out. All this shit happens, which is horrible. It's like when you're writing a massive dissertation or an essay in MS Word, and like you haven't saved it since you started writing, and then the save button on MS Word is right next to the close button on the drop down menu. So you click drop down on the mouse, click the file menu on the mouse, drop down comes down, you move to click save, and just 2 pixels inches down you click, and you've clicked close, and you've lost your entire dissertation or essay. This time the battery did not even show. I'm going to throw the battery away because it didn't even show that the battery was going down. Fucking hell. I was here talking for so long, spilling my heart to you guys. Well, okay guys, I might have just lost that video, or I might be able to recover the file. If I can recover the file, yeah, that was about signs that I'm getting older. The last point on the list says, I'm afraid of losing me and my personality in my store of dreams, or atmospheres, or who I am. And that's about my situation here becoming so bad and taking me away from my focus on what I was trying to do in the past as a kid or as a teen or as a young adult. Like, when your situation takes your complete focus and then your situation gets bad, then your focus never gets back to what it was doing originally and what the original goal was that you're working towards when you didn't have the bad situation. Anyway, I want to recover this file, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it. If I do it, then you are probably seeing this video. Fuck Sony and its camera designs. Thank you for watching.